Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 65 of the Future of Work show. For those of you who've been following us, the last several weeks have all been about AI and culture. Of course, all of this is at the back of the work that Jaspreet Bindra and I are doing on researching what are some of the cultural factors that enable organizations to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to AI implementation. And of course, for those of you who know us, my co-founder Papia Banerjee and I, we work with leaders to help them develop the capabilities that they're going to need in a much fast-changing world. So with that, let's get started. I have a very, very special guest with me today, Professor Kartik Hosanagar. I'm just going to bring him on stage. Hi, Kartik.
Hi, Shalini. Thanks for having me.
I'm so delighted to have you with me today. I have been reading your work and your very interesting intersection between the creative part of what you do and the very academic part of what you do. So I just can't wait to, hear what you have to say about AI human collaboration today.
Looking forward to our conversation.
So, Professor Kartik Hosanagar is the John C. Howard Professor of Technology and Digital Business at the Wharton School, but that's not all. He's also the founder of Jump Cut, and he's democratizing data in Hollywood. He's also the author of a book called A Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence. So, welcome to the show, Kartik.
Thank you for having me, Shalini.
Kartik, before we get started, can you share a little bit about how you got interested in this as a subject?
Yeah, so AI wasn't exactly on my horizon when I started my PhD. At that time, it was primarily focused on the changes that the internet was bringing about. And so when I started my PhD in 99 at Carnegie Mellon University, my focus was the impact of internet on business and society. And that's essentially what I was doing. Now, one of the legends on campus at that time was Professor Herb Simon. He is one of those few people who has achieved a lot in multiple disciplines. So he's won the Nobel Prize in economics. He's won the Turing Award in computer science. And he's also won the highest award in psychology as well. So, an interdisciplinary researcher who was focused on intelligence, decision making, how do you create artificial intelligence, and those kinds of areas. And so, it was almost like if you're at Carnegie Mellon, you have to take a course by Herb Simon. And I took that course, and it was my first exposure to topics in AI. It wasn't the theme of my work per se, but it was certainly an initial exposure. And then I did a couple papers which had some intersection with AI. In fact, one of those papers was on what was then called autonomous agents, which is something that is starting to come back with creating artificial intelligence agents that are capable of doing tasks autonomously and take inputs and interact with other AI and so on. Um, so I'd done some papers on that, but really my immersion into it was because of my students, my PhD students. So one of my students, his name is Dan Fleder. He was very much interested in algorithmic recommendations, like the recommendations we might see on YouTube or on Netflix or Amazon. And he was interested in how these recommendations are influencing consumer choice and how the design of these systems impact the choices we make. And the point being that the choices we make ultimately influence who we are because we are a product of what we read, like books get recommended on Amazon, what we watch on YouTube or other news channels, and what we buy and consume as well. So that was what first got me interested in, okay, what's behind these algorithms or what's inside this black box, and got me more immersed in AI.
How interesting is that? So I did a mid-career PhD, and yeah, it was about using complexity sciences to understand change, and particularly autonomous change. So, since you spoke about that, within complexity sciences, there was its own agent-based modeling algorithms. So it's so interesting. And of course, it would have been impossible to do a PhD in organizational behavior without encountering Herb Simon.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you will know about Herb Simon. He's one of those people who You talk to people in many different disciplines and you have your angle into his work, but people who are academics tend to know his work because his impact is kind of far and wide.
Yeah, yeah. So I totally understand. And Karthik, it's so interesting because you spoke about how in your doctoral, dissertation, it was about the impact of internet. And yet, in some of the podcasts I've heard you speak about how you think AI might be just as transformational as the internet or the steam engine. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because, there are people who are not quite sure. Sometimes we come across people who think maybe it's just all hype. Maybe, the last couple of years, it's just been a huge balloon and, you know, uh, not everyone is as sure. So would love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, I think the interesting thing about new emerging technologies is that you're going to hear opinions on both sides of that divide or that spectrum. Somebody like myself saying, "Look, this is going to be transformational," and somebody saying it's overhyped. And perhaps there's a bit of both going on right now with AI, right? So I think what's interesting about these things is it's not the first time because even when I was doing my PhD focused on the internet, I remember when I started, it was the peak of the dot-com boom.
Yeah.
And by the time I finished, it was the bubble had burst. And I remember one academic even asking me, "Oh, you're still studying the internet? I thought it's all dead." Then I had to convince him that no, it's not. It's very much going to be alive and transformative. You're just in uh, a period of quiet in that cycle. And I guess even with AI, those questions are valid. The thing about it is that as academics, we have to bring some evidence behind these statements, and we need a more formal way to investigate these kinds of questions. And there is a concept known as a general purpose technology that is focused on exactly this. And general purpose technologies are technologies like steam engine, like the internet, like printing press, like computers. These are technologies that have impact in multiple industries. So they're not technologies that are relevant to one or two. These are technologies that are characterized by what's called technological dynamism, meaning it's improving very rapidly. And these are technologies that are known to have significant impact, economic impact, whether it's at a macro level, meaning entire economies, which economies or countries do well or not, are shaped by who is leading, say, in that technology race, including at the micro level, which companies are winners and losers are shaped by. And we've seen internet really do that globally, whether it's, as an example, you look at retail over here, and you look at Amazon versus the older companies that have disappeared, or in India you look at what Amazon.com or .co.in or Flipkart and others are doing, right? So that's how we think about these technologies. Now the challenge with these technologies tends to be that sometimes it's obvious in hindsight what was a general purpose technology and what was not. The challenge is being able to predict, is this technology currently a general purpose technology? And there's some recent interesting research, and multiple papers have investigated this question. One I'll bring up is by a professor at University of Toronto, Avi Goldfarb, and they look at jobs data, hiring data, as an indicator of general purpose technologies. And then they look at various criteria. For example, are the jobs pervasive in many industries? Is there a lot of R&D within the jobs? Are the R&D jobs also pervasive across industries, and a few other such things? And their research clearly shows that uh, machine learning and its related technologies, whether you call this cluster as AI or data science or machine learning or whatever term you use, but ultimately their research suggests that these technologies have the properties of general purpose technologies like in the past. And among the current set of technologies, these are the most likely. And one more I'll mention is my own colleague at Wharton, Dan Rock. He's got a research study that's only focused on generative AI, and that's specifically trying to see what jobs that are out there can generative AI do. And they look at 1,000 professions, And they find, with a very conservative way to analyze it, they find that almost 20% of jobs will have 50% or more of their tasks impacted by generative AI. And I think their estimates are conservative because that study was based on what, for example, LLMs could do 2 years ago versus what they're doing today, or even projecting out what they will be doing 5 years from now.
It's so interesting you say that. So I and a colleague, Jasprit Bindra, we've been researching organizations that are ahead of the curve, in AI implementation. And one of the things we're seeing is, you spoke about this link between data science. It is organizations and business functions that are inherently literate in using data science that are really ahead of the curve, because they already have the skills around, how do I use data to answer questions that are relevant. Very often these are functions that are in some way client facing, customer facing. So it's almost been a natural progression for them to use, data science tools and machine learning and, more progressive AI tools, almost as a seamless continuum. So I totally understand what you're saying. So, Karthik, can
Yeah.
I ask you, like, some of the earlier technologies you spoke about were transformational at a society level as well, right?
Yeah.
Certainly, the steam engine changed civilizations and how I mean, cities and the way we live was sort of set into motion by that. What are
Yeah.
some of the changes that you think you anticipate might come from the AI revolution?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think, again, as you were saying, these technologies like steam engine and others brought about massive change. One of those more important changes is how we have moved. First I'll look at, say, work, and then we'll talk about society as well. But if you look at work, we moved from a society which was primarily driven by physical labor and muscle power to a society where we move towards more and more information work, intellectual work, which also affected society in various ways in terms of how we organized in cities, what kinds of jobs we did, including the entry of women into the labor force. Lots of huge changes in society. And I think when we're looking at AI being able to do some of the information work we do today, again, there's going to be massive changes in society, including shifts in the kind of work we do. I think the emphasis on analytical skills and reasoning, even though AI is not yet able to do reasoning well, but I think we'll get there. And will, I think, shift more in terms of the work we all do into some of the soft skills, things like creativity, empathy, leadership, decision making, judgment, those kinds of things. And I think when we're talking about that kind of shift, the societal shifts also will emerge where we may not necessarily need to be working 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, maybe the nature of work will shift, which will mean the nature of society will shift. We will need to figure out how to occupy some of the, people, given what population is and what the job needs might be. And so I think there's going to be massive shifts, no doubt. And it may not happen in the next 2 3 years, but again, industrial revolution and technologies like steam engine and electricity had its impact over centuries.
Yes.
um, and so I think, again, we're talking about certainly some immediate impacts and some impacts that we'll see, I think, over decades. It might be a lot faster with AI than with steam engine or electricity, but I think maybe certainly over decades there'll be massive changes.
I mean, I would predict something similar. I think the thing with thank you for introducing me to the term general purpose technologies. I really like that. But the thing with some of these technologies that are, as pervasive, and I will even include, something like the smartphones in it, is that they start off as being absolutely almost innocent. You think, okay, that's just one small thing, what's it going to do? But then before you know it, it's shifted the way we live our lives, and it shifts the way businesses do business, till it's so integral to the way we live that our habits changed over just a handful of years, I would say. And
That's true. And I think COVID period is a really interesting example of that, where we're only 25 years into consumer adoption of the internet. And, look at how internet was so central to how we functioned during a period of COVID, whether it was being able to order groceries online or being able to work from home and so on. And you can't even imagine what a pandemic like COVID would have been like in, say, even the mid 90s, where the internet existed, but certainly consumer adoption was fairly limited. And so I think we see that within even 20 years with the internet. And so, yes, of course, as you said, things like whether it's adoption of the internet or mobile phones and so on, it starts off in small ways, but then, you project it out or you look back after a few decades and you see how life has changed so dramatically.
yeah, yeah. So tell me, Karthik, what do you think are the implications then for, say, business leaders? And I'm going to pick up something that you just said, that, some of these are changing so fast. If you're a business leader, how do you even begin to keep pace with this?
Yeah, so I think one thing that hopefully is obvious when I say it's a general purpose technology is business leaders cannot afford to wait and watch when it comes to their AI strategy. It can't be, let's see what happens in the next few decades and we'll respond, because what happened with the internet will happen. I think the startups that actually are built in an AI first way are going to be very threatening in the long run. And it's companies that are agile and kind of say from the very beginning, look, we need to reinvent around the internet. We need to reskill the workforce. We need to run a series of experiments to see what can we do, what can we not do today. We need to build those capabilities. We need to build the data infrastructure. So there's a lot that needs to happen. And so they need to start investing in that. And I think the other piece, a related piece, is I think the expectations around general purpose technologies. These are transformative over a long period of time, and that long period doesn't have to be centuries, but it will be in our lifetime or in a CEO's or C-suite people's lifetime. And so the key is it won't happen in 3 months. So don't look for your financial ROI metrics in 3 months, or redefine what those metrics should be. And I think those metrics have to be focused on things like the infrastructure we've built, the organizational agility we've built, the reskilling we've done in the organization, the education, changing the DNA of an organization, where now you're kind of telling people who haven't been exposed to these things that, look, we need you to think about AI, we need you to integrate AI into your workflow. All of that requires time. And so I think investing into that is extremely important. So I think education is a really big piece of this, employee education. The other piece of this is, rethinking your ROI metrics and working, with your boards, with your CFO, and thinking through how do we measure success here. If success isn't, I put in this many dollars at this quarter, and at the end of the quarter, my revenues went up or my costs went down by this much. And so, figuring that out is also very important.
In the organizations that we're studying, which are ahead of the curve, one thing we find is that someone either absolutely at the top or pretty close to the top has adopted AI as an article of faith, um, with almost like the kind of faith that was sometimes reserved maybe a couple of decades ago for, should we be spending on our people, because we're not quite clear whether what the ROI of that. It's much harder to measure, right? But we
Yeah.
see something very similar with those organizations which have chosen to be ahead of the curve. It's a choice because someone at the top has just placed a bet there and feels that if we aren't there, we're going to be left behind. And I see what you mean when you spoke about AI first startups, because that's a fundamentally different way of looking at the problem, right? The
Yeah.
customer problem. So I can totally understand what you're saying. I'm wondering if you have any advice for established organizations which were born pre AI,
Yeah.
on how they can possibly adopt the AI first startup sort of mentality or perspective. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts there. I think the first is you need to, have the employee reskilling plan,
Hmm.
and your AI strategy should include that. And that reskilling plan, obviously involves, a series of efforts in the organization where you're educating them, but also making everyone implement AI in some manner or the other. And that also includes, by the way, not just hiring ML engineers and producing AI within the company, but it's also consuming AI within the organization. So
Mm.
your management team, your non technical teams need to be figuring out, how do I reimagine my workflow? What AI tools are out there to help empower my workflow? So I think that's one piece of this. The other piece of it is that AI shouldn't be one big moonshot project. So what are you doing in AI? Sometimes it's like, oh, we are doing this one thing. A few years ago, and it still is the case, that the answer to that question used to be, oh, we are trying to implement chats in customer service.
Yeah.
And I worry about those kinds of strategies because of two reasons. One is, if you've got one moonshot project, that's setting yourself up for failure, because I think a lot of early projects will fail. Secondly, if your one project is consumer facing, customer facing, that's very risky. So I would make sure you have a portfolio of projects, some long term, some short term. The short term projects are just about quick wins, organizational learning. You do something, roll it out in 3 months. Don't worry about financial ROI. It's just about, okay, we got comfortable with handling data. We got comfortable with using foundational model. We understand its limitations. We understand what it means when these systems hallucinate. We understand what kinds of risks are there in bringing our data to these models, exposing our data assets to these models. So it's really about that understanding. And then you have a few long term projects which you kind of pursue over time. The other one I would say, and it's related really, is don't have like 2 year project cycles where you're saying we'll release something in 2 years. It's got to be very fast product iterations, release something every 2, 3 months. And it could be small things and you're building on those over time. So that's an AI first mentality, which is you kind of, digital first mentality, even which is it's agile development and not releasing things. So these are a few things that we could talk about many more, but at least these are places where I would begin. And of course, one last one I'll mention is that if you don't have a data infrastructure, you don't have the people infrastructure, don't assume that you can start off with AI and say, okay, we're going to invest in AI and we'll see results in 6 months. Because what's going to happen is you will spend a year just building the data infrastructure and even having a core team of people who understand AI. So set those expectations right, invest in the data infrastructure and the people infrastructure. They are the key enablers to get returns from the AI investments that you will make along the way.
So interesting you're saying this, Karthik, and I'll echo some of this. In the organizations we're studying, and of course our subset is non-typical. We're only studying the front runners.
Yeah.
What we're finding is that there are two or three things that are common to most of them. One is a widespread AI literacy program. So,
Mm.
multiple speakers, multiple programs, so that anyone who has even the slightest interest has an opportunity to have some familiarity. And then the setting up of something like an AI COE or an AI cell, which
Yeah.
does a show and tell. That
Mm.
okay, here's how you can look at a problem, and here's a way to solve it. Some of them have even simplified the process of finding a problem to solve by giving a gradation, starting from the simplest, like, okay, you can summarize your data, you can use
Yeah.
your data to test a hypothesis, and so on. So, in one of the organizations we studied, they had like 12 categories of problems that you could potentially use.
Mm.
And they were using the AI COE or AI cell as the show and tell, so that business leaders started to get comfortable with, okay, just exploring that, oh, okay, I can use this, in a way that perhaps I hadn't ever thought of before. And to your point of how quick the turnaround cycles are, I personally was blown away, because in some of them, it's just 2 weeks, 3 weeks for an AI tool. and the creation process very agile, but it is basically the business team and the tech team sitting together for those 2 weeks and coming up with something. It's as simple as that. In one case, for an award-winning product, it was the result of a weekend hackathon. So, the cycles are incredibly short. I was personally surprised at how much can be done over just a year in terms of creation of assets. And like you said, a lot of it is just getting familiar and comfortable. Oh, okay, how do I use this? What kinds of problems can it solve? And in organizations which are at the front of the curve, a very natural transition then is, okay, anything that we start, how much of work should happen through humans and how much through AI, which is our next question.
Yeah,
you
but
know,
one quick note on what you just mentioned. I like everything you said. The center of excellence is a really interesting model to get started. To have a core team that's responsible for spreading AI knowledge in terms of also creating the case studies and examples and so on. And I like that model a lot. One thing though is sometimes I notice what ends up happening is the rest of the organization starts to view the center of excellence or the AI cell as the ones in charge of AI. Okay, they are figuring out AI, we can do all the other things. And then it becomes a problem. So what I like is, say like at Google, you've got like these things like Google Brain and DeepMind, which are centers of excellence that are really thinking deep and hard about AI. But at the same time, they've spent a lot of effort in making sure AI's AI knowledge is not just centralized and it's diffused throughout the organization. And so, what I really like is a hybrid structure where you've got the center of excellence, but that you're making sure there's embedded expertise in AI in a decentralized way as well, and there's some like a hub and spoke kind of model within the organization.
Yeah. And I love that. And I love that what you're saying is absolutely right, because, and one of the questions we were asking business leaders and, the tech teams is they're potentially infinite use cases, right? There's no way that, it can't just be driven by an AI COE. So what's the process look like for you? And what we're seeing is that the AI COE does the task of enabling them to think about what kind of problems can I solve? But then it is a business leader who takes the lead and says, okay, I have this problem. And whether it's the central team or whether it is someone within their team with an inclination for the technology. So this hybrid model where there is a COE to sort of hold a reserve of that technology and educate. I think a large part is the education, but the actual selection of the problems, you're absolutely right, is not purely central. Sometimes some are central, but largely it's diffused. In that sense, it's such a different technology. You
Right,
know.
right. Yeah, makes sense.
So Karthik, I know that you've done a lot of work on human AI collaboration, and what's the kind of work that you think AI is best at, and what is the kind of work that humans are better at? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be an increasingly important topic, which is how do you integrate AI into the workflow? What does it take to get meaningful results out of a hybrid human plus AI team?
Yeah.
And how do you make sure that you're getting results as an organization, whatever your financial metrics are or productivity metrics are, but you also have to make sure employees are happy with that. And so the satisfaction also goes up and so on. And so I think there's many questions here that we are looking at. One question, for example, is around trust. So, which is how do you make sure that the people using these systems trust the AI, will actually consult the AI, will actually use the AI as it's supposed to, versus management pushed it down, it's there, but you kind of just ignore it. And we see a lot of evidence that people lose trust in AI fast. And in fact, the moment they see any AI failure, they kind of just say, okay, the system doesn't work, or it is poor, or it's has some errors, and therefore I will not use it. But the problem is that human work also has errors, And so the question isn't like, is AI error free, but it is, are you improving things when you bring AI in? And what's the way to combine human and AI? And so we've investigated a few things. For example, when you bring in AI, can you give some explanations when it comes to AI recommendations with the work, or AI decisions come with explanations of some sort? So we've looked at, and there's a lot of interest in making AI more interpretable and more explainable. One of the things we found was in terms of how it affects trust, it's actually fairly marginal in terms of impacting trust. It has other benefits. Maybe, for example, anyone who is doing testing of the AI better understands the AI before rolling it out. But in terms of the actual users, we found impact on trust or the final performance metrics did not go up a lot. On the other hand, we find that if people can observe the results of AI's decisions and even have an environment where they can play with the AI, make decisions on their own, look at AI's decisions or recommendations and see how it's improving, just constant feedback and transparency on what's happening, I think helps a lot with trust issues. Giving people control is also very important. And so, fully automating the work certainly destroys trust. Or even, when we talk about control, some of the more interesting and creative tasks, making sure people have a role in that has a
Ah,
huge impact on trust. So
so
if
well
you,
said. Yeah.
yeah, so if you, for example, we've looked at many different settings, but I'll take the setting of, for example, writing related work. You have an AI system that can write really well. But if you can make sure people have a strong role in, or an important role in creative ideation, in the creative framing of the problem, and AI can do some of the more grunt work like drafting and so on, it's an interesting combination where people are far more satisfied than if you just have AI do everything and have people just be give the instructions to AI, look at the output from AI, and be an approver of yes or no. And even though the performance are similar, we find that giving people some of that creative control is important. So, a number of these kinds of things that we are observing, which is be careful of two things. One is humans and AI have different strengths. And so I think the team does complement each other. And so think about how best they can complement each other, whether it's a co pilot kind of model where you kind of say that AI is going to support humans and humans will call AI whenever they need help. Or it's a task partitioning kind of model where you say AI does these pieces and then human does these pieces. And then the second piece is, as I was mentioning, if you're if you're bringing in AI, just make sure that some of the creative and more enjoyable pieces of the task or the work are not taken away from humans, because then that destroys job satisfaction.
Learned so much through what you just said, Karthik. I mean, really. And it makes so much sense. I haven't heard enough people talk about it, to be honest, but it just makes so much sense. Both what you said about, um, how the transparency, just being able to see how your AI tool improves over time, builds trust, how, in these different models of AI human collaboration, just a deeper understanding of who does what better. And, I can completely understand, although I had never thought of this quite this way, that retain the human elements of creativity so that the joy of work, the parts of work that people really enjoy, uh, they're still doing, and the parts of work that maybe they were indifferent to or perhaps downright did not enjoy, then AI as an assistant, in a sense. Wow, really, really well said. Thank you so much. Karthik, what are your final thoughts on AI and jobs? That's a huge question, and I know different people have different perspectives. And I think there's data of all kinds out there, frankly.
That's right. I think, again, the net answer on what is going to be AI's impact on jobs isn't clear to anyone.
Yeah.
And we can only speculate at this point. But I think one way to think about it is, any technology in the past has displaced jobs and has created jobs. And that's always been true. And in fact, even when we talk about some of the general purpose technologies that we just discussed, steam engine and so on, it took away jobs, right? Somebody was riding a horse cart, or there's this famous story of the Luddite revolt in UK, where
Yeah.
power looms were introduced in textile mills, and people were losing jobs. And there was a revolt where they started ransacking and attacking some of these factories that were rolling out power looms. And so it did take away many of those jobs, but also at the same time, that helped bring down the cost of textiles, that helped expand the market quite dramatically, increased utilization, increased demand, increased sales, and created many new jobs, not just in the factory, but also as the market expanded, whether it's in marketing and sales and these other areas. When the market expanded, those jobs came up. So I think AI will, of course, do the same, which is it will take jobs away and it will create new jobs as well. The big question, of course, is we know AI is different than every previous technology in the sense that it's improving so rapidly and it's actually getting into something so fundamentally human, which is intelligence. And so the question is, can it create more jobs than it takes away? And that is the answer we all don't know. And we can speculate. One hopes, and this is where I fall, but it's a hope rather than, saying I have the evidence to prove it. One hopes that in the end, human ingenuity will win out, which is that we are going to give up a range of activities, just like we did over 400, 500 years of industrialization, where we gave up a range of labor related activities and started to get more into information work. We will similarly give up a range of information activities and perhaps climb the ladder to a higher level where we can get into deeper creativity, deeper leadership, empathy, and create new jobs around those. I think that's my hope. But the other big piece, which is not a hope, is that we know for sure one of the things that AI is going to do is shift value capture from labor to capital, because AI is going to do more and more labor work. And so whoever owns the AI, whoever is deploying the capital, is going to capture the value, which ultimately cannot be concentrated in the hands of a few. And so we have to really make sure the gains of AI are somewhat evenly distributed. It will never be perfectly even, but at least it's not concentrated among the few. And to pull that off, you need regulation. And I'm at a business school. I'm a professor at a business school. I fundamentally and believe in capitalism, but at the same time, regulation will have a really important role to play in AI to ensure that the gains are evenly spread. And the gains have to be spread in such a manner that it's not that a few of us continue to work 50, 60 hours a week and then the rest of us don't have jobs, but it's got to be one where maybe all of us will not have to work 5 days a week. We'll have to work fewer hours. And then we all have more leisure time that we can spend on other activities. So I think there is a rosy future that can be realized, and that rosy future requires some, planning and, both from business and governments. And that rosy future for me is one where we are, again, we are probably working. I remember when I was a kid, my parents used to work on Saturdays because, banks required people to come in on Saturdays and work half day or full day or things like that. And, I work 5 days now, or at least try to now that I have kids. I think, we could be in a world where we're working fewer days, fewer hours, and doing far more interesting work during those few hours we are working, far more creative, far more socially oriented work, leadership, judgment, creativity, as I was saying. So that's the rosy future, but it's not guaranteed.
I love that. I love that because, um, I mean, what you're essentially saying is that that's a possibility, but it's a possibility that, we'd, and it's not one organization, it's not one government, it's collectively, in a sense, have to very proactively and consciously create, because that's not necessarily going to be the automatic outcome, in any way.
That's right. It's not the automatic outcome by any stretch. We'll have to invest heavily in education, less in wars and all these other things there. The money constantly keeps going. We'll have to invest a lot more in making people more mindful business leaders, more mindful at work, which when I say mindful, I mean honestly the kinds of things that, you know, even some of the spiritual traditions in India are focused on, which is around being present, being having empathy for people. It's about being creative and those kinds of things. That we have to figure out a way to tap into a part of our mind that we use, but really a lot of our mind is also spent on a lot of other things. So we'll have to, the most successful people are the ones who are going to be able to leverage AI for the computational work and then bring in their creativity and leadership into the job.
I so love that. Karthik, any last words for our viewers, those who are, still not sure how to integrate AI into their regular lives, professional or personal, on how they should get started?
Well, my, I guess, closing comment will be, if you haven't started in a big way yet, please invest in AI education, start learning about it. I've personally appreciated the importance of taking some of this AI knowledge out of my classroom, out of the 100 200 students in the classroom to more people. And so part of that effort has been, for example, writing a book which is called A Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence. And that book is focused on AI for lay people. So it's not meant for technical people or even for CEOs, but it's for society at large to understand AI. I've also started rolling out a bunch of courses that are online through Coursera. One is called AI for non-data scientists, and besides Coursera, we have courses on Wharton Online and elsewhere. And by no means am I the only source of this information. There's a lot out there, but I would mostly say that please invest in that AI learning and skilling, because change is coming fast and you want to stay on top of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karthik. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing so many of your ideas, many of which, to be honest, I was hearing for the first time, despite the fact that we've been working in this field, quite concentratedly for the last 6 months. So truly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the lovely conversation, Shalini.